Hello, everyone. How was lunch? Okay, cool. I hope it was nutritious. Yeah. So, do you guys have like 3 meals a day? Some wish? 2? Okay. 1? That's tough. Yeah, I don't know. Like some people say that you at least 3, but I don't know. I feel like sort of a number, um, arbitrary number. It could be different for everyone. But you should eat. Yes, that's the point. You should eat. Um, cool. So today, for the rest of the afternoon, we're going to similarly as we did for the Pokemon Battle Simulator. We're going to be creating this movie app in here with your help, breaking it down to the most elementary pieces. So just like we did with the Pokemon, let's do. So I crafted these steps that we had for the Pokemon. The first step that you want to do is, of course, read the README. Second is identify requirements or needs. Well, also I wanted to say I can Slack out these notes later on if you. I would rather you pay attention than trying to like code along with me. If you want to take notes, that's fine. But yeah, I would rather you pay attention, ask questions, and be engaged with what we're doing than trying to follow along. Like something that didn't work for me when I was a fellow, but we're all different. But yeah, I was unable to keep up, and I prefer to ask questions and make sure that I understood what the instructor was doing rather than trying to take notes. I respect those of you that take notes, and I think that's a good practice to get back to. Yeah, that's just a recommendation. Cool. So yeah, so let's go for solving this. Let's go with these steps: read the README, identify the requirements / needs. This step I've sort of broke into 2. One is like list our app components. And find out the data needs and sources. What data do we need and where are we gonna get it from? Then let's build a wireframe of the app, build an HTML skeleton, and lastly, let's code the functionality for that app to work. So, cool. So let's do this. Take 3 minutes. Give the README a read one more time. Cool. So what are some of the stuff um, in the README that stands out? Maybe what could have been clearer? Yeah, anything regarding the README. Michael.
The select box
Mm-hmm.
containing the API removed. I didn't know that you wanted us to
This part?
request every time.
Okay, yes, so that is part, yes, that is something that we saw on a lot of you. Yes, we wanted you to make but again, that was not explicitly stated. To when you select one movie, to make a network request to get the details of that movie. Most of the time, so this is most of the times, like when you get a list of things in APIs, you don't get the entire data at once, because if you're getting, like, it's just because the Ghibli API is small. But if you're getting Facebook posts or something that you get a larger number, you don't get all the information at once. You will probably get the ID or something that uniquely identifies that piece of data, and then you need to make another network request to get more information. Like, let's see if there's an example. Like something as simple as Canvas calendar. So you see how all my events appear here, right? So I don't know if this is how it's built, but I think there is a network request that is being made to the Canvas API to get all my events. And that is giving me all the names, like maybe the date. We'll need the date, the time that is due to, the kind of event, but it doesn't give me more, I think. Let's see. So what happens when I click on one to sort of get more information? I haven't tried this, but let's see what happens. So what I think is, let's click on one. So there was a network request being fired, but it was to an image. But I'm sure that, so once I click, so it seems that all this information comes in that initial request to get all the events, including this. The only thing that seems not to be coming in is just an image. But when I click here on the title, you see like it's going to take me to a different page that is going to have all the information regarding this event, right? In our case, with the Ghibli API, it happened that we will get all the information that we needed once we get all the films. But most commonly, you only get a list of stuff that has the IDs or some other piece to uniquely identify a resource, and then you make another request to get more information. Like, let's do this. Sort of another example to bring out this. Let's say repos. So this is like the GitHub API. No, this is not a good example. So I'm trying to find an example where, yes, you get like a list of things and you only get the... Right, Pokemon is a good example. Like you can get, let's do, I think, Poke API. Right, so this is a good example. Like for the Pokemon API, if you do a GET request to this URL, you get all the Pokemon. You get, well, actually, no, you don't get, so this is another thing, like, that's good to see. So there is 964 Pokemon, but you only get 20. You can see that in the results here. This is very common too. You don't get the entire data set because imagine, like, this is going to take some time. This is a lot of data, 964. The API only gives me the first 20. And in those first 20, we can see that I don't have all the information about Bulbasaur. I don't have all the information about Ivysaur. I have a URL to get more details. This is more commonly, as we will find it out there. You get a list of stuff, and each one will have a URL or an ID with which you can get more information. And this fact that it only gives me the first 20, this is something called pagination. This API will paginate the results because sending them all at once is inefficient. You might not need them all, and it might take a long time. So this is paginating, and that comes from you could think of this as a book. The first page is 20 items. And this is a really good API that follows the REST standards, where it says here, if I want the next page, I can make a request to this URL. And then this has the next 20. This 20 will be the next one. But yeah, so the point that I wanted to make is that most of the time you don't get all the information at once. So, okay, so that was a. Let's make a note here. Let's keep that in mind. Anything else that stood out to you on the README? Something that stood out to me, and I was surprised, or maybe you did get it. I thought this was going to be confusing. Refresh this page. Here. So, who could explain this part to me? Michael.
I'm guessing you were able to just add it to the DOM, not the value, not do a post.
Okay, yes, that's correct. Yeah, it doesn't mention anything about making a post request or anything like that. Yes, just do it in the DOM. I think this part, not save, was you're saving the reviews just momentarily. When you refresh the page, they're gone, but you're saving them. So okay, cool. So that's clear. Cool. I think that's pretty much it. So we got the README. Let's identify the requirements and needs. And to do that with listing our components. Who can share with us what are some of the components that this app will need? Giselle? Header? Great. Nicholas?
The Ghibli logo.
The Ghibli logo. Cool. Also, is this header here, Giselle, the top area, or is just the text? Okay. Okay, so let's do maybe header, like app title. Let's do that. Header. Cool. What else? From the README, this body. Cool. What else? Somebody else. Oh, and another component of this app. Karen? Form. What kind of form? Let's be a little bit more specific. Like, what is this form for? Uh-huh. Like text input and submit button. And then what is this form for? What is the select box for?
Select.
Cool. Anything else we're missing here? Joanne? An empty div. What more than an empty div? What would we want to put there? So okay, yeah. So we'll need to, let's call that like the movie details, right? Like section. What else do we need here? Cool. So let's do maybe a hierarchy, or like what goes where. So I guess everything will go inside of the body, I guess. So maybe let's put also the select box. And also let's order in order of appearance. The select box should come first, then the single movie details section, then the form to add a review. Oh, we're missing out something else here. Yes?
The list, the unordered list.
Correct, the reviews list. Cool. So also let's do, so these two we can think of these two going into like one component at the top, the app header and the Ghibli logo. So let's do like header. Header. Let's put these two underneath that. So this is like app title. So the page header that goes at the top will have the app title and the Ghibli logo. It will have, then we'll have, after that, we'll have a body with the select box to pick a movie from, single movie details section, single movie details. I think this that is fine. Then a form to add a review. The form has to have a text input and a submit button, and then a review list. Also, I'll add to here maybe some comments about the Ghibli logo must be center vertically. Center vertically too. Sort of taking some notes as to what are some of the stuff that we need to do. And this has to be opposite sides. Right? Since in the README we have, they should be horizontally oriented and opposite sides. Cool. Anything else that we can be missing as to what are some of the pieces that we need to build this site? Cool. So let's move on to find out our data needs and sources. So what data do we need? We need movies or films. We need Ghibli films. So let's divide this into like data needs. We need Ghibli films. We need the film details, right? If we want to display that. You know what else we need? Reviews. Let's list this in this way. We need, this is the data. This is the data that we need, and then the Ghibli films are gonna come from the API. So let's put this in here. The API endpoint to get the films are, so you can see here. So you read this documentation for turning in the assignment, and you saw that here at the end we have endpoints. They document the endpoints. One such endpoint is films. And we can see here, this endpoint will return all the films, information about all the Studio Ghibli films, and here you get an example. They're using curl, and we have HTTPS Ghibli. I think there is, here we can also click on this to see the full link. And there's examples on other languages. It would be good if they had one in JavaScript, but we don't need it, so we just need this URL. Right? This is where our films data is going to come from, as you found it in the API. So I'm just going to list that here. The film details. So here is where we could see that if we use this URL, we get, how many films do we get? We get 20 films. Does this say, that's probably just the total number. Since we don't have, we see that we get an array. We get JSON representing an array. And that array has 20 items. And it must mean that, well, we only have 20 movies, since we don't have any indication that we might only be receiving a partial set of the movies, right? Do you guys remember in the Pokemon API, what was the indication that you were having a partial result?
Yes, the count.
The count, comparing the count with how many you got. And another one will be that you get a link to the next page. And here we have those 20, and this seems to provide all of them. I think, let me see, films. Here, what if in I guess this was the instruction that we were lacking in the README, because the return all films endpoint has a query parameter that we can specify to get as to like what are the fields that we want to query? What is the pieces of information that we want? And here we could have limited this to, what if your API only gave you this? I'm going to do ID or fields equal to ID. Here. So imagine this will be more common. Maybe you get the ID, you get the title. Let's work with this data. Imagine you only get the ID and the title. So this was something that we were lacking in the README. To be more explicit, we should have said, make sure to check the fields parameter and use only the title and retrieve only the title and the ID to get all the movies. Is that when we skip this, when we skip the fills parameter, we just get all the information for all the movies. And again, this API is doing that because it can afford doing that, because it doesn't have 1,000 movies, it has only 20. More commonly, you will get something like this, where you only get a subset of the information, and you don't get all the details. So cool. So let's do this for the films. We can get the films here. If we look up the documentation, we also saw that films has a few. So films has get all the films, and let's keep scrolling down. And here we have this other endpoint that returns a film based on the single ID. Yes, Siham.
What we need like the ID?
Uh-huh.
I think that what we need an ID is like we can just on the title.
Yes, so that's a good question, and I think yes, it was part an error on our end where the README didn't specify to use the ID to make this second network request that we're gonna need. So, in a more real world example, you will need the ID because you're not gonna get all the information of the movie at once, the way that we were getting it. You'll get something like this. Well, imagine to get the films, imagine this API only gives me this piece of data. Right? I only have the ID and I only have the title. But the thing is that with this ID, as specified with the documentation, I could then go in and look at this example. We have here, where did it go? We have here that we can make an error request to this endpoint. So let's try this. Let's paste this here. And here I'm going to change this ID with this ID, the cat returns. I'm missing that 9. Copy that and then paste it here. So note the URL. So if we do just /films, we get all the information of all the films. But if I get films / the ID of a movie, I'll get only the data for that movie, which is only one. So what we wanted with the assessment was for you to try interdependent network requests, where you get a list with all the movies and their IDs, and once you have that, you make another network request depending on what the user had selected to get the details of that movie. So yes, the argument is, I don't need to make a second network request because I have all the data, right? And you're true, that's correct. The problem is that more commonly in the real world, you're not going to get all the data at once. You're going to need to make more than one network request to get all the data that you need. So this is why we're going to need the ID to get all this information, which is the description, the release date, etc. Does that answer your question? Partially?
If I understand, so
Uh-huh.
we're looking like for the title for description of the film, so we need to use that specific IDs.
Correct. Yes, because most commonly you're gonna get just this data, this one that we have here, which doesn't have it all. Like, this is because also, we're dealing with a small API that doesn't have a lot of data in. And that's why I'm saying most commonly, because real-world APIs, I'm not saying that this is not a real-world API, but this is a small, doesn't have that much data Um, in an API that has a lot of data, it's going to take a lot of time to get all the data if you want to get it all at once. And most APIs will not let you get all the data at once because they're going to be wasting resources on their end. Their computer has to be running longer to get all the data. And transferring that data, if it's a large quantity, takes longer too. Cool. So here, this other endpoint will allow us to do a request to get more information about the movie. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here. The reviews, where are the reviews going to come from? Lucas?
User input.
They're going to come from the user. So here, sort of like making these two columns, columns. We have our data sources, data need with where is the data going to be coming from. We have the films, we have the film details. Cool. Any other pieces of data that we need that maybe I'm missing here? That's pretty much it, right? Cool. So, any questions, comments so far? Okay, let's do the wireframe for this app. Because we did the breakdown of components here, we basically have our wireframe made. So we found that we have sort of two sections, the header and the body. So let's just do like a large document here. We'll have the header, the body. The header will have a logo. We said it has to be centered vertically and opposite side. So let's do. Oh, we don't have to. We didn't specify that we have to be on the left. We can see that in here. So let's just do like here we'll need another right logo here. We also say in app title, and it has to be centered vertically too, and opposite to the header. So let's do it here. You can see that they're centered vertically. Wait, is that correct? Center vertically? Horizontally centered. Yeah, horizontally centered will be if they're both in the middle, which is not what we want. Right? It's vertically centered, meaning it's in the middle of our header. And we have our body. The body will have a select box to pick a movie. So let's do that here. Then under there, we will have a single movie details section. Oh, and here, as Jonathan was saying, here we'll have the movie title. I think it was release year. And description. Release year, movie title, and description. So, but this is sort of like one component, right? So let's draw here a box for that, and inside of that we have the movie title. Film title. We have the release year. And we'll have the description. So those are So we have our single movie detail section, then a form to add a review. And then it says this form has a text input and a submit button. So let's do text input here and a submit button here. We're going to do it round so that we cool. So we have our, oh, we're missing something, which is the reviews list. For the review list, we're going to add a person here. Just have it here. Also, something that we didn't go into is the fact that, oh, I think this will have a title, right? The reviews. And then we'll have a list where we're going to have every review. Also say that like, every review will have the title of the movie in bold. So this is this one. This will be reviews. Okay. Questions or comments about the wireframe? Looks reasonable. Okay, let's do. So we have that. Let's do the HTML skeleton. So in here, I'm going to create a file. Oh, so also all this I'm doing in a folder that I have in like Unit 2 assessment review. Here I'm going to create a file called index.html. And just open that with code. Yes, sure. The last one? Okay, yes, you're correct. So you see it here. We don't need, yes, we won't need this. We won't need a title. I will say it will be nice to have a title, so this we won't need any of this. We'll just have the list. Mm-hmm. Good point. Let's do HTML5. Let's change this to Studio Ghibli. And let's build our frame, our wireframe. So we said the body is going to be divided into two sections. The header, I'm going to create a div for that. And maybe give it a class name of header. So we're going to need to style that later. The second section is body, but I feel like we shouldn't give it a name body. Well, because there is something already called body. So let's call it main. This is sort of like the main section. So there we have our two main parts. We know that the header will have an image. So let's do image. Set the source later. And we'll also have a title. And I think we said it's an H1. Right? We said it was an H1. with the text Ghibli review app. So I'm going to put that in my H1. On the source for my image, for the logo, I will have to use this link that we share with you here in the README. Click on that, and then this opens up the image. This is the Studio Ghibli image is a PNG image that doesn't have any background, but this is the URL that I need. I think this is taken, as you can see here, this is taken from Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the one that is hosting this image. So I'm going to just copy this URL, and I'm going to paste it on as the source for my image element. I want to also add an alt tag. I'm going to do this in multiple lines to be a little bit more organized. Alt Studio Ghibli logo. So let's see what we have currently. Let me open this. Index revealing. Oh no. Revealing Finder. Open this. Cool. So this is what our page looks like currently. We have the logo and we have our title. Cool. Let's do this styling last. But we have the two components. So we have our header. Oh, I should have not closed that. Let me close this. Go back here. So now let's do the main part. The main, we said it has. Yes. No, you don't have to put the alt, but it's good practice. If your image is broken, as I just did here, it will display a description of what the image is supposed to see. Also, for people with visual impairments, the alt tag will describe to them what the image is about. So you should always have it. Cool. So we have the image there. Let's put our main. In our main, we said let's put. Wait, what did we say? Steps. Let me open this in here. We said in the body has a select box to pick up movie. Let's do that. So we have the select element. Let's just like leave it like that. Maybe let's give it an ID since we foresee that we're gonna need to do something with it. The ID that I want to give this is film selector. Film selector. Since we only have one element, we wouldn't even need to give it an ID. We could just do query selector select. But it's a little bit more descriptive for anyone who may review our code to give it an ID and say, oh, I want to get from the DOM the film selector. It's a little bit more descriptive as to what is that select about. So we have that. Then we have the single movie details section. And we see that that's going to have some stuff inside. So if it's going to have some other stuff inside, I'm going to create a div. Maybe let's give it an ID of single movie section. Let's leave that. So, okay, so here we can say we could create these elements. Let's do like an H2 for the title, a P tag. Wait, what did we say in the instructions for the title? H3. H3, and then a P tag for the release year, and another P tag for disable this thing. Oh, this is a nice extension that I use because I'm really bad at spelling. This helps me correct words. Sort of like Google, not Google, like Microsoft Word when it shows you that a word is misspelled. Like if I misspell here selector with an E, see that green thing? And then it says unknown word. And then I do command period, and it gives me options for replacing. Selector. It's a nice little extension if you have problems like me spelling stuff. I just want to disable this. Cool. So we say the P tag, one for the title, no, one for the release year and the description. For now, I'm gonna put like here, I'm gonna put some content in here. I'm gonna do release year. We're gonna discuss why we might not want this, like movie title. This is just so that we can see a list something. Description. Also, like there is this thing called a lorem ipsum. This is used for like mocking paragraphs. It's very common. Did we get to like use this at some point here? It's like if you want to like have a like see your website with some content and you just don't want it empty, you could use this random text here that is that you can generate here. I just want a paragraph for like the movie description. This is like I think this is Latin, but I don't think this doesn't really mean anything. It's just put Latin organized, and so I'm gonna paste this here just to have a sense of what my page will look like. Put this here. So we have that release year. Let's put like for now 2019. Let's see what we have. Let's go to my page. It seems that I closed it here. And we have roughly what we need for the top section of our movie. We don't have any options here, but we see that this is what the movie title will look like, the release year, and if we had a description, this is roughly what it will look like. Let's leave that for now. Questions or comments so far? Okay. So let's go form to add a review. A review, here you can ask like, oh, is the review part of the movie, the single movie section? What do you guys think? There is no right or wrong answer. Should the form be inside of the single movie section or outside? What are some arguments in pro of that and against? In pro, like
Outside because you're not saving.
yes, Owen.
Put it outside just because like I want to go separate to me, so I just put it in a separate bag.
Yes, maybe another. Why would we want it separately? Louis.
Maybe for styling reasons, so it stacks
Mm-hmm.
the content easier.
Well, that wouldn't matter if I put it inside or outside. Well, I guess So your answer is not like totally wrong. Like you could say, oh, I want my movie section to be this border and like this background color, right? And then that'll apply to what you said. Like, and I want the form to look slightly different, and I don't want to put them inside because then if not, the form will look like the same. But yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Could you say that a little bit louder? That's the right one.
So you want your form element to be a bit more isolated in your HTML page. That way you can manage it a little bit easier since you are going to be, using the whole submit aspect of it.
And I think just to add to that, we can foresee that this data here inside of the movie section is going to change depending on whether the user has of what movie they have selected, right? We don't want our form to change ever, right? So we do that. We do the form outside, sort of the same for the same reason that we have the select outside, right? When the select, we know that the information inside of the single movie section is going to change depending on what movie we have selected. Right? And we don't want our film selector box to change ever, right? So let's do the form here. Form, and then this form will have, let's give this form an ID. Maybe let's call it review form. And then this form will have an input type text. Maybe let's put a placeholder. Your review here. Write your review here, and let's close that. We need a submit button. Remember that for a submit button, you can have a input type submit, and the value has to be the name, what the text that I want. Let's maybe do add review. You could have this, or you can also have a button. And then inside add review. These two will behave exactly the same. Even though they're two different HTML tags, they will both add a button to the page. That's it. See, here, like visually, you can tell which one is the button and which one is the input. They worked in the same way. There is some cases that you want to watch out for, which is if you have, let's see, so I'm clicking in the button and that seems to be for sending the form. Okay, in this case both will send the form, yeah. I think if you have, there's one case I think you have to watch out for, which is if you have two buttons. The last one, oh, both are sending the form, never mind. If you have one button, the default action for the button is to try to send the form. So one button will work as well as the input. I prefer the input. It's a little bit more descriptive, saying that is for submitting the form. Let's do this. We have this, yes.
Why did you put a value on add review?
Uh-huh.
I didn't put that in my code and it seemed to work just as fine.
So the value here when I'm doing input type submit will be the text that will appear in the button. I think if I skip it, it will probably just say submit. but I'm not sure. Let's try that. Yeah. If I skip the value, the default name for the button will be submit. Yeah. If you want a little bit more customization, you want to set the value. This value is the text that appears in the button. Okay, so other questions so far? Do we have the review list? So let's do the review list here. We could just do the UL here. Let's just do the UL. And here we'll have a review with the movie title. We know that we'll have movie title that has to be in bold. We're gonna see how we can do that. For now, let's just mark it in this way. Fresh, and this should look like that. But this in bold. We can make it bold if we do the B tag. Actually, I think the strong tag. So a little bit more syntactically correct. Like that. Cool. So we have our HTML. I think roughly all the stuff we need. Yes. Let's see. Just to remind myself. In HTML5, both strong and B tag exist and have a different meaning. B is a tag for offset text conventionally styled in bold. So you see, like the B tag is used for bolding the text without conveying any extra emphasis or importance. The strong tag, it represents a plan of text with strong importance. The thing is, like, this is why we sort of ignore this, but for a screen reader, this will be important because the screen reader will emphasize the text in bold it will emphasize the strong text, but it won't emphasize the B. B is just for visual. Right? Yeah, that will be. Yeah, so this is another example for EM and I. Yeah, so I is for text conventionally styled as italic. There is no semantic meaning, and EM represents kind of text with emphatic strikes. So yeah, even though visually they're the same, one conveys more meaning. Cool. So we have that. What will be the next step? Code. Finally. So here, let's break down this code. Wait, do I have another file? Steps. Let's break down this code. Like, what are some of the stuff that we have to code? Michael? Fetch request. What is this fetch for? Fetch request to populate. That is a word that we use. Populate. Populate means like load, display. population. Oh, that's where it comes from. That's interesting. Cause people to settle in, feel, or be present. Feel, I think this is the meaning that we're using it for. To filling in the select. So the fetch to populate select the select box with the movie titles, film titles. Cool. What was the second?
Something to keep track of the changes in the select.
Okay. Listen for events. Listen for change on the select. Like in more will be like listen for when the user selects the movie in the selector. Let's do this first. Listen for when the user selects a movie. Anything else that we need to code? Okay, so listen for when user submits a review. Cool. Yeah, I think these are the main parts that we need to code. Anything else that we could add? Arguments in pro or against this? So, yes.
We had language about special requests for the film, individual film.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. Let's add in here. Fetch film details. To display title, comma, release year, and description of the stat. Fetch film details. Cool. Note how, did this unconsciously, but I added this one as the third one instead of this, right? Even though this was sort of like suggested later on, I realized that unconsciously I had to put it on the third one. What do you think that is? Yes, do this.
Because you need the film to be selected and displayed before you can write a review.
Correct. You everyone hear that? You will need to select. You will need to displaying this information will be based on what movie the user selected. Cool. I think we have half our code or half our problem solved with these steps. Cool. So let's add a JavaScript file. And then do touch index.js. Let's open that. Oh no. Don't save. JS. Now here, actually, let's link this. Let's do console log hello, and let's link this to the HTML. And here, script src index.js type No, is it type? I always forget. Text, JavaScript. Script. Let's see if we have that console log showing up in our code, in our website. Refresh this. Let's open the console log, and we have our console log there. Cool. So that means we have it connected properly. So here, what is the first thing that we will want to do in our index.js? And why? Jonathan? Wait for the DOM to load. Or, yes, add an event listener. Add an event listener for when the DOM loads. And we do that, we document that that add event listener, DOM content loaded, and we pass in a listener function where we're gonna write our code. So let's do, just to sort of also remind ourselves of asynchronous behavior, let's do last console, and let's do console.log DOM loaded. What console log are we going to see last? What console log are we going to see last? Who says we're going to see last console log last? Who say we're going to see DOM content loaded last? Cool, let's see. We got DOM content loaded last. From those that voted DOM content loaded or DOM loaded last, could you share with us why you picked that? Peter?
The things happening outside the DOM content loaded are happening immediately as soon as the page comes on, and the things that are happening when the DOM content loaded is waiting for the content to actually load on the page.
Perfect. Did everyone hear that? This function here will not run immediately. It will run once the DOM has loaded. This, everything outside runs instantly as the JavaScript is loaded, not the DOM. So we have that. Now here, so what is, as soon as the DOM is loaded, what do we want to do? Let me take these steps from here, copy and paste them here. As soon as the DOM is loaded, what do we want to do? Giselle? Correct. So we want to do this step, as Giselle pointed out. We want to fetch the request. We want to fetch request to populate the select box, and we should write a function for that, right? We could do it here. I could start typing the fetch directly here, but it will be a little bit more explicit, more organized, if, as Giselle suggested, we create a function for doing this work. And we could think of this work as, let's break down this. What are some sub-steps of this that you think? The correct URL. Or, I think what you're pointing to is, we want to make the network request. So here, like, it might not be, this comes with practice, but here we have in this thing that we describe in one line, like fetch request to populate the select box, we could divide this task into two. One is fetching the movies, and the other one is populating the select box. We could do it all in one step, but that will end up having a function that does two things. It's better to have always, as much as possible, a function that does only one thing. So let's do the network request to get all films. And after that, let's populate the options, or populate the select, using a little bit more accurate language, with options. Well, so here we get our name of our functions are here. One should be get all films. The other one should be populate select. Let's create those two. Const get all films. Const populate select. So actually maybe something is populate select or add options. Let's do populate select. Well, we have our two functions. Oh, also, so Jonathan pointed out we need a URL, so we will somewhere else we'll need a URL. So let's do. I guess we'll put the URL in the get all films. Cool. So we have our two functions. Let's try to do the first one. Get all films. So we said that this has to fetch the information from the API. For an API, for doing that, we'll need a URL. Let's do API URL equal to. Good thing we took notes. I wanted to do this. Let's paste this here. Const PI. Remember that here I'm gonna leave these query parameters here to simulate more of a, to force us to think about how would we make that second network request to get the details in case we don't get the details. So this is only limiting the response to have only the ID of the movie and the title. So I have the API URL. Then I can do the fetch. Do fetch. And you could do the Axios. I'm gonna do to fetch. I'm gonna pass the API URL. Then I have to, because fetch, calling the fetch function returns to me a promise. I need to then add a .then to it so that the function we pass in here, this anonymous empty function, will run when the promise has been resolved, successfully resolved. Right? Here, what we want to do is, well, to this function, the response will be passed. And this .then, what it's going to do first is going to parse the response. It's going to convert the response from the raw JSON data to a JavaScript object. And we do that with response.json. JSON here is a method or a function. It's a function that when a function is part of an object, in this case the response object, we call a method, right? And JSON is a method in the response object. This will convert our raw JSON data into a JavaScript object and return a promise. Oh, I have to return here. Then we have to, that promise, the promise of converting the data from raw JSON to a JavaScript object can fail. Because what if the data is not JSON and we're trying to convert it to JSON? This is why this is also a promise. Like the return response.json will return to you a promise that is the document will be converted from JSON formatted string to a JavaScript object. But that could fail if the response here, if this response is not an object, is not a JSON document, it will fail. And then here we get the actual data. So we can do console log that data. So this fetch request will make a network request to this URL. After that has been resolved successfully, it was converting the JSON document that was returned by the API into a JavaScript object. And we're going to receive that JavaScript object as something called data here. And we're just going to console log that. We also wanted that then that catch in case stuff goes wrong. Again, an error here. For now, let's just do console log error. Ideally, so here, like when applications have errors, they don't show the error and they don't console log it. This is some feedback that I gave some of you, which is once you're finished, like once you're turning in an assignment, make sure to remove all your console logs. Like you should never leave console logs around. Actually, I took these notes of some of the when I was grading some of your assignments of some of the patterns that I noticed. We're going to be addressing some of these here. So some of you left console logs. Consequences of that is like a dirty console, which makes it hard to debug your code if you add one more console log, because then you know like where is this console log coming from. And also you'll be leaking data to a user if they know how to access the console, right? Yeah, you don't like you want to find out, and there are services that you can use to finding out when your app breaks, but you don't want to show your user that the app broke, right? What you do is you display a small pop-up saying, "Oh, oops, there was a problem. Try again later," or something like that. In this case, we're just gonna do the console log for now. You know what? Let's do this. I'm gonna say, so I don't say something and then I don't do it. Let's do handle error. I'm gonna create this function that I'm gonna call. It's gonna receive the error here. I'm gonna just call, instead of console logging the error, I'm gonna say handle error. What this function is going to do is going to create a paragraph. Let error notification, I'm gonna call it document.query selector. No, not query selector. Create element, a p tag, and I'm going to say p that, or actually error notification dot inner text is equal to, oops, there was a problem. Please try again. Just do please try again. And the last thing that I want to do is append this to the document. To imagine I had like a notification sections on my website. That's actually how I will do, but for now, the document body will do. Dot append child error notification. Oh. This function will be a little bit more, you know, you'll want to display maybe a different message depending on what kind of error you got. In fact, like here, I'm not using this error object at all. Maybe for now, I'm just going to remove that and remove that from here. Just handle the error. Let us know that there was an error. Cool. So let's see this working. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break the URL. So actually, first let's call this function get all films as soon as the DOM has loaded to get all the films. Let me put this back here. As soon as the DOM loads, we call this function, we fetch that data, and we console log. Let's see if this is working. Refresh here, refresh, and we have a console log on line 19 with an with what seems to be an array because it has square brackets with 20 objects. So this means we are running this console log here, which is an indication of that everything went well. Now let's break it. Let's break this URL. Just remove the L. Refresh. Then we see our notification popping up. You see the notification? I think error notification UX. Yeah, this is more like what you will find in something like this. This is some more realistic as to what you want to show. Right? Like something like this. Maybe an element like this, or I've also seen one of this on the side, or something like this. Got a small pop-up like this. For now, we're just simulating that with this p tag for now. That was an error. Cool. So let's put that back. We refresh and we see our data here. So these are our movies. In this case, we are only getting the ID and the title. Okay, but with this data, then we can populate the select box, right? Instead of console logging the data, let's populate the select. So for doing that, let's then instead of console logging the data here, and also here this data, as we're console logging it, we see that it's an array of films, an array of movies. So I'm going to change the name from data to films. Because I know that that data is films, and it's not going to change unless the API changes. But this is a better name than just data. So I'm console logging the films, right? That's the data that came back. But instead of console logging them, what I want to do is populate the select. So let's do populate select, which is a function that we are about to write here. And to this function, I'm going to pass in the films. Now this function will show the films here. And then if I console log the films here, remove this console from here, we should see the exact same thing because I'm just console logging somewhere else. Here, I'm calling my populate select. Populate select. You know what? I think a better name for this would be populate select options. Change that. Populate select options. So to that function, I just pass in my films. Then what would I want to do with my films? I have an array of films. What do I want to do with them? Like, what does it mean? Like now getting to like the nitty-gritty of what does it mean to populate the select using JavaScript. Giselle? Okay. And how do we do this in JavaScript? This is exactly what we need to do. We need to create option tags within the select with the film titles. How do we do this in JavaScript? Joanne? It's a document. Okay, let's do that then. Document that create. Actually, let's do that option equal document that create element. What kind of element I want to create? I want to create an option. Okay, so I created an option. What will be next? Like here, like, so creating option tags, we get that part. Within the select, we're gonna see what that means. And with film titles, what does this like part mean? Stephanie? That's correct, yes. But before we can do that, there is something else that we will need to do. A little bit louder. So we will need to do the option.value, .value, and option.text, the inner text. This is correct. But how many times do we need to do this, Cameron?
So you ask me another question?
No, you can ask or answer.
Well, you were asking what you need to do before you think that the
Yeah.
options and you grab the ID for the form.
I need to grab the form.
So you can put the option in.
You mean I grab the select, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Uh-huh. Yes, we will need the select too before we can add elements. And how many options do we need to add to this select box? 20, or as many as films in the API, right? So a little bit louder. We have to loop. Why do we need to loop? Correct, right? We need to create one option for every movie, right? That sounds like a repetitive task. So a loop is great for repetitive tasks. So that means that this line here that we wrote must exist inside a loop because we want to create one for every single one. So let's do a loop. We could do the regular for loop, but I think a nice one is let film of films do this. For film of films, this will loop as long as there are elements in film. Right? in films, the array. This is an array of films. Let's try to do like console log film.title, because we saw that these objects, these 20 objects, these 20 films that we have two properties, ID and title. Let's console log the title for every single one. Refresh this, and we have the title of every single one individually logged out. Well, because of this, right? Okay, so we're creating the option. We're not doing anything with it yet. Let's set the, so here, what's the difference between element.value versus element.inner text? Joy?
Inner text is what's displayed on the option itself to the user, and value kind of like the hidden value that's supposed to be.
Yes, this is you said like hidden value. What was the other thing?
The code, the client name.
That let's do hidden value that is sent. So the thing is, like, when we didn't have JavaScript, you will send the form. You see how, like, I don't know if this is worth going into. When you have a form, like, more commonly, let's say you have a form like gender, right? Where you're gonna pick. Let's say you're registering for an event and you need to specify your gender, and you have a select that says gender. You have three options: female, male, and non-binary. When that data gets sent to the server, what you will want to have is only one option, the one that you pick, will be sent to the server, right? So we could say, let's do that here. Let's do that here. I think it's worth going into. So imagine we have the select here. So a select actually should be also, like, more commonly before we had like JavaScript. A select will be part of a form too, because it's an input element. So let's do this example. So we have a form here. Let's say you have a form. In here you also have an input. Type text. Let's do input type text. Let's do name. Let's give this input a name. This is going to be username, like that. So let's see how, and also let's specify the three options that I was saying. So this is sort of like outside, but still related to this, as to why we will want to have a value. Let's forget for a second that we're talking about films, and let's go to the example of, like, this is gender. Let's just call this like gender selector. Also, you have like a label here. Label gender. And here you will have a label name or username. And then the select, let's populate the select with some options. Let's do three options. This first female, male, non-binary. So this gives us the select that we want, right? Also, I also need an input to submit. So this gives us a simple form that we will want in that application, right? Note here, what is going to happen here with the URL, I'm not preventing the default. Note here the URL. So I'm typing in my username. This is my GitHub username. I'm gonna select my gender and I'm gonna hit submit. So you see here, the username that I typed gets placed here in the URL. You see, username Alejo4373, and the gender was not sent. That is because because the select doesn't have a name and my options don't have values. Let's give my select a name. Select name gender. Let's try again. Let's remove this part. Remove this part. Let's refresh this page here. That mail submit, and here we have. Now we have my gender also in the URL. Right. So this is before we could manipulate the forms with JavaScript. This is the way that this information will be sent. This will work without fetch, without XML HTTP request, because this is the way the web was built. So this information will sort of travel in here. But what if in my API I don't want to say the word male and the word female and the word non-binary? I want to just say M for male, F for female, and N for non-binary. And I don't want this entire thing. But I still want to show that to the user, because to the user this makes sense, right? So what I can do is set the value of male to be M, the value of female to be F, the value of non-binary to be N. And let's look at what that will look like here. So to the option, I'm going to do a value. And I say F, maybe even lowercase, male value M, and then non-binary value N. So these are internal values. These are the inner text, as Joey said, will be the data that gets displayed to the user. This N are going to be the values that get sent to whoever is receiving and expecting this information. So let's see what happens now. Let's refresh this. Username, my username, male. Oh, also, I want to remove this from here. Let's go there. My username, male, and then submit. Now let's inspect this URL now. So we have the username and we have the gender. Now it's just M. Let's change this to. Also, the first option is always selected by default. The first option is always selected by default. So if I try to send this let's see this. If I try to send it like that, yeah, my gender by default will be F. As you can see here. So the inner text is for the data that you want to show the user, but the value is for the data that you want to send. There's oftentimes obscure data for a user. Like an F for a user doesn't mean anything. But in my backend, I know that that's how I identify the gender of a person. Right? And we saw that when we didn't specify a value, we were sending here the inner text, which was male or female. So what we want here is, note also here in the elements, if I inspect this here, I end up with the select box having the options here as we specified with their corresponding values. Right? We see if we do non-binary, then we see gender. Note here that I didn't specify a name, so the username will be empty. That's seen here. So maybe in that case, I don't want to send the information if they didn't fill out the form. So that's like an example. Now let's see how that applies to what we want. I'm gonna get rid of this. I'm gonna get rid of the form. Just gonna leave the select. The select is going to be the film selector. I don't need a name. I could leave the name. I could even grab this element instead of the ID. I could grab it by the name. The name could be something like selected film, right? In case we were doing it the old way. Film selector or name selected film. So, okay, now going back to this, we want to loop over the films and create an option for every single one. Let's do that. We are creating an option now. Let's do option dot inner text equal to film dot title. Right? Every film has a title property. Oh, you know what? I think we should have left. Maybe let's do this. So I changed that here. I'm gonna get back to the form that I had before. But yeah, let's do this. The form that I had before with the select to sort of like see. I'm gonna change this instead of gender. I'm gonna remove the username stuff. I'm gonna have the submit. Imagine like this data. So this is a good thing that JavaScript allows to do, which is whenever the user selects an option, we display a different movie. Before, that was not possible. For you to display a different movie, you had to select something, then hit submit, and a new page will load with all the information of the movie. That's how we used to work with before JavaScript came along. JavaScript allows not to have to refresh the page, just make another network request and display the new information, which is quite handy. So let's do this. Let's change this back to film selector. The name is going to be selected film. And let's see how this will look like in our URL once we add some options. So I'm just going to leave this here. We end up having this, right? Our select with a submit button. But here, then I'm going to do option.inner text film.title. The next thing that I want to do is to append this to what? I want to append this option to the select box, right? So let's grab the select box here. Select equal document.query selector. I think I gave it the ID film selector. Let's verify that. film selector. Owen?
I'll say I used I think the option has like an add.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So here we could do, once we have the select, you can say select that append child, and we can do option. Let's see if this works first. Okay, this seems to work, right? And Owen was saying that he found that he could also do select that add, and then just do option. Let's see if this works exactly the same. Save, refresh. It works exactly the same. That is because, well, let's see if the VS Code says something. Add. Just like that. Oh, wait. Select that. Add. No. Oh, no, it doesn't say anything. But in the documentation, it says select that add. So here we have this select element that add. So this is a function, a method that is only available on a, well, this might not be true, but we know that it's available on the HTML select element. And it specifically says this method adds an element to the collection of option elements for this select element. So we have a collection here, which will be the select. We can say add item. Oh, this one we can even specify if we want to add before or after, it seems like, which is cool. And then we have an options here. Yeah, so we have cell add. So yeah, the point is we could use add or append child. I think this is a little bit more nicer to read. I think the add under the hood might be doing an append child. It doesn't say anything about append child, but I have the suspicion that it might be an append child under the hood. It's just that they created this one because it reads a little bit nicer. It reads select that add option. Right? So we have so far, where is my page? Here. So great, we've managed to populate the select with options. Let's give ourselves a small check mark. So we made the network request and we populated. Great. What are some of the notes about the select options that we are not fully compliant with? That the README specify. The README says something about the select. Lewis?
You need to have a blank option to start.
We need to have a blank option to start. That's correct. Also, excuse me. So before we do that, I wanted to show you here what will happen once if we were trying to like build this app without JavaScript. What we'll need is when I hit submit here, a new page will load with the information of that movie, right? And this data will be sent to the backend, to the API, requesting that other page, right? And here, note the URL how it's going to change because I have this select on the form with a submit button. I'm going to hit submit, and now I have this in my URL, the URL, and then question mark select film castle in the sky, separated by classes. This is what is known as URL encoded. The spaces must be converted to pluses or %20 because URL don't accept spaces, right? And this might be fine. This might be fine sending the name, but it will be better if we send the ID, because what if two movies have the same name? This is not true in this API, but if we have like IMDb, which has a ton of movies, we wouldn't be able to select individually one by its name, because, well, there might be a few that have the same name. So instead, let's have the ID here. Let's have the ID as the value of the option. Let's do that by adding not only the inner text, but also setting the option.value. We're gonna see like why also we will want to have the values. Let's do that to film.id. So now I have that to film.id. I refresh the page. So visually, my select doesn't change visually, but if I inspect here, we see that now every option has a value, and the value of that option is the ID of the movie. Right? Now, if let me get rid of this part. Let's go back here. My URL doesn't have anything at the top. We have this one selected. Let's do Pompoko. Now I'm gonna hit submit. The URL will change. Again, this is like the way that it used to be. And then now if I zoom in, I have select film. Now instead of the movie, I have the ID of the movie here. And this reliably, uniquely identifies a movie. So we have the ID here. Yes?
Does that happen if you change? It needs to be the value, not, it can't be like the ID of the option. It's got to be the option.
Correct, it has to be the value. So, yeah, this is all in the context of forms. You know, forms will have fields, and those fields will have a value in. Right? And this is the value for the select film field, right? Cool. So let's do that. And so the reason why I'm putting in the ID there, not only is because it's more correct, but because I want to use that ID to get the details of the movie later on. Right? So let's see that. So first we also want to add an empty option, right? Because it says, the README says that no option should be selected. Or in other words, an empty option should be selected. Oftentimes what you have is, let's call it let empty option. Actually, yeah. To document that create element. Also in this thing, I'm gonna change all this to let a film. Step here, IDs. It's cool. API supposed to make a request. It allows requests to, but here, wanted value, and that's all fine. It will work, but more correctly, why not use the other select in here? Film, we have this URL that we could use this URL, and in here plug in the ID of the movie. Is made this URL parse correctly because we got this here, the empty option, and I set this the select film. So when an option, when by a value for